everybody. I am setting up a few things here for our talk today. This will be the first MINDWALK for Module 3. And I am going to change to screen share here in just a second. I want to make sure that I've got my correct things being shared. Okay. All right. So here we are. This is, all of these things y'all been working on have been difficult because I know you're having to go through basically 2.5, 3 weeks worth of work in 1 week. Hopefully it's beginning to build up for you and become more for you. This week we're moving into, though, something that's difficult for a lot of people, and that's the question of reality and being. Some people think this is the biggest waste of time in all of philosophizing. Other people think that it's a fun pastime to have on hand, wondering about reality, but it's not something that should occupy you till you become sort of crazy or something. Of course, it's actually the attempt to understand what is real and how reality may work that actually leads us in the direction of the sciences. So all of these things that we have asked ourselves about across every human culture at every time in human history slowly but surely kept leading us in the direction of seeking to understand what you might call the basis of reality. So let's do what I like to do because I think that it begins to kind of open things up for y'all. Let's do a little etymological work. Reality. I think that for a lot of people, when they hear the word real, they believe it means genuine or authentic or, the real deal, if you will. And certainly when you live in the wonderfully interesting times that we live in right now, where your diverse political and your cultural leaders and your political leaders are all regularly telling you that the things you hear are not real, they're fake. That certainly makes real something that we struggle to understand, and it becomes more difficult to get a handle on what real is or what really is when you're being told constantly by priests and ministers and presidents and governors and teachers and Joe Rogan and any host of leftist progressive radio as well, that the majority of what you hear isn't real. So let's go ahead and think for a little bit about this term reality or real. Latin is where we get this word, realis. Realis means an actual thing or things, and it's based in the Latin word for thing, which is res. And res, this word actually is derived from reed, or from our word reed and race. They're connected to each other, and it actually means that the thing as the reed in the water, right? So like that thing. So what we're actually asking about then when we ask about realis, about reality, about the real, we're asking what things actually are there, right? which things actually are there and which things actually are not there. Over the course of the last couple hundred years in the West, but there have been a number of schools across human history in China, India, Egypt, other parts of Africa, that actually concern themselves with this. What is actually there? Which things are actually there? Which things actually are not there? Right? And so in one sense, you might say that it's the distinction between perception and illusion, except that we know from our work with Descartes last week that perceptions themselves can be illusory. They can be wrong. They can be mistaken. One thing that we're going to want to kind of pay close attention to in our chapter is really going to be in the search for reality is going to be some stuff like the way that certain thinkers who were in what we would call sacred traditions, like St. Augustine in Christianity, or the people who were in India in the diverse traditions there, especially Buddhism. But there have also been some what you might call material thinkers in India. That these thinkers are actually asking us to, in a lot of ways, understand first that what we can touch, what we can see, what we can hear, what we can taste, what we can smell, that all of these different things, they have some important part to play in our understanding of reality, right? So instead of just perception here, and I said illusion, of course, what I really want to put there is imagination. Is it actually what we're perceiving, or is it just our imagination? So again, Descartes says, well, you could be mistaken about your perception, but at least you can start with this idea of an inner perception. I perceive as a thinker, right? So perceiving is a kind of thinking. And if I am thinking through perceiving, I know that I am. So there's something happening that should be taken into consideration. And now I just have to figure out the way to really understand how this is happening, what this is happening. All of this is called metaphysics. Well, that's another Greek word, of course. So this is a Greek metaphysikon versus Latin. Latin just borrows the term. Technically, if you were to actually translate the word from Greek into Latin, it would be transnatural. So it just sort of picked it up as a art. But, you know, it's not, right? So it's not supernatural. A lot of times we think of metaphysics as supernatural, but it's not supernatural. It's about what goes beyond our kind, beyond our knowledge. I'm using ken here as this is a Scotch word. If you watch Outlander, you'll hear him say this: I do not ken. That means I do not know, right? And actually, interestingly enough, our word knowledge, know, begins with ken. And that ken becomes can. So knowledge is ability, right? So it's beyond our ability to say, it's beyond our knowledge, it's beyond our familiarity. That's the metaphysics. But can we get back to it? That's the big question. So in this sense, metaphysics then can either happen in two ways, and it goes back up to perception and imagination, or perception and illusion, and that is that it can either be speculation based on evidence. This is theoretical understanding, right? what Newton did with gravity came from metaphysical speculation in the attempt to take the evidence that he had gathered along with his mathematical modeling and mathematical language and come up with a way for understanding the main forces that have an effect on the material world or on the world. So you have speculation based on evidence, and we call that theoretical understanding. This is one of those places where it's super duper 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 important to point out to folks, theory means profound contemplation, right? It means significant consideration. It doesn't, so when people say, well, that's just the theory, what they actually mean by that is that theory is not the same as hypothesis. And that's what people often mean when they say it's just a theory, meaning it's just a hypothesis. This is one of those ways that language can, you know, work in the favor of someone who wants you to say, not believe in the theory of evolution. There's a lot of evidence that has come about for the notion that life evolves. I'm not saying life evolves exactly the way that Charles Darwin said it did. I'm not saying it evolved the way Richard Dawkins said it did. I'm simply saying there's a lot of evidence which allows for speculation from that evidence to give us a theoretical understanding, meaning that you're closer to the way things may be if you've thought about this theoretical, and if you thought in terms of theoretical understanding, then you would be to the opposite way. And I think that really kind of bears it out. I'm sure there are people who are going to listen to this or who are taking this course that believe that the world was created by God. There's actually nothing that science can say to disprove that. However, there's a lot that science can put forward to say the universe, you know, the Earth is more than 7,000 years old. And you start seeing the weird slippery slope that you get into when you challenge theoretical understanding with really pure speculation or with dogmatic explanation based on how you read some old sacred literature, that when you're talking about metaphysics, right, you can have this speculation based on evidence that gives us theoretical understanding. That theoretical understanding can demonstrate and show how old the universe is. It can begin to kind of figure a lot of those things out, how old the Earth is, how life evolves, how life changes, how it goes from one degree of being to another degree of being. All those things can actually be thought out pretty well, and they've been thought out pretty well. And they don't just go away because someone says, no, the Bible says the world is 7,000 years old, or someone says, no, the Vedas say the world is 1 billion years old. You know, either way it goes, science cannot disprove the claim that there might be a higher intelligence behind the universe, but it can really in a lot of ways say your fundamentalist, overly strict, invariant interpretation of this text is hiding you to what your own mind can perceive, right? And I think that's important to talk about because in our world, metaphysics primarily is New Age voodoo hoodoo, which is okay. I mean, I'm writing a dissertation right now on how you can use tarot cards to learn techniques of philosophical self-elucidation. But that doesn't mean that I believe tarot cards can tell the future, nor that I believe tarot cards are made by Satan to tempt people. They're a tool, like every other human artifact and tool, right? And they can be used in order to get you to become more creative and more playful with the way the world is. Okay, so kind of getting a little bit back to this, we don't want to think of metaphysics does not equal New Age magic. It doesn't equal you know, those kind of claims. That's a lot of times that is pure speculation that starts off in the perception of the world and then quickly begins to follow a metaphysical dogma, line of dogma. And we'll get into a little more about how that's problematic as this chapter goes along, right? Because you're being asked to actually see what your metaphysical commitments are at this point, to see, you know, what is it that you believe in. It seems weird in a lot of ways that there would be people in the world around you at this point who don't believe in atoms, right? Many of the same people who'll say the world was made 7,000 years ago are also people who will not actually disagree with the notion that the world is made up of atoms. And that has to do, in one sense, with their metaphysical commitments. They're okay with the metaphysical commitment that the world can be made of atoms because physics is able to actually accomplish something with the world, with the metaphysical speculations or theoretical understandings that physics has accomplished over the last 400 years. They lead in the direction of pragmatic, practical experiments that have actual, that can actually show you some kind of predictable outcome. Evolution doesn't do that. In fact, the only place where we see evolution, you know, we see a variation of evolution is that we see in our everyday lives, we see how dogs are bred and how people inherit certain genetic traits, and that if you put together some different, you know, some different entities in a species that are, you know, the best of the best, that you can slowly but surely change that species into something else. So in that regard, we sort of were like, well, I perceive breeding. So it seems to me that, you know, even if it is evolution, there must be something behind it that's guiding it. Whereas when it comes to atoms, which nobody ever sees, but it's the fact that scientists and engineers are actually able to get results that you can see, that people tend to believe in atoms you can't see, but not believe in evolution, which they claim must actually only be a kind of divine husbanding or something like that. So that's, you know, one area with metaphysics. So we want to avoid the kind of metaphysics that's pure speculation based on little or no evidence. This bleeds into an understanding of ontology. So metaphysics is basically the attempt that people have made, different people have made over the course of the last 3,000 years at different times in different ways to speculate about the nature of the universe, the kind of cosmos we live in, and then develop a theoretical understanding that helps to explain most of what we're seeing. So pure speculation, right, is usually a lot of times something that we come up with that we just make do with. You might ask yourself, how much of what you believe, right, is your metaphysical commitments are conflicting with each other. Like I was saying before, people will believe in physics, but they won't believe in biology. They'll believe, right, and that has to do with their metaphysical commitments. Just like your commitments about human nature will change how you interact with human beings, your commitments about metaphysics will also change how you see and interact with the world. So getting into ontology, ontology is an aspect of metaphysics where what we're trying to do is to make an account of being or beings. Now, probably the most ambiguous of all words, but it's the word that does the overwhelming majority of work in almost all languages, is to be. It's to be. Have you ever actually defined being? Right? There are a couple ways people try to do it. They try to sometimes define it as essence, but that's circular because that's just the Latin word for being. Sometimes they try to define it as existence, but that's also circular because that's the Latin word for standing out in being, right? Existentia. You can say that being is the most general of all things from which everything comes, but once you say that, you're not really saying anything. And you can say that being is just different kinds of things, but then that means that there has to be some way of accounting for making an account of the different kinds of beings and then putting all those accounts together and getting a more whole account. So ontology, in this sense, can be twofold in the sense that it's looking for a particular kind of being, right? And that would be your regional ontology, which would be each science, right? And this would be looking at and exploring one given kind of being, okay? And as this regards, there's a number of, all the sciences have a being that they describe, right? So physics is examination of motional or motion, being as motion. Chemistry is the examination of being as, it's a better way to put this, combination. Biology is the attempt to account for beings as life. And then you can get into more specific life, animal life, plant life, right? So these things can become, so the interesting aspect of the regional ontologies is that they have to do with a particular kind of being and the way that being works in its given region. The issue, of course, is that it's one of the things that we've really been dealing with a lot in the contemporary Western world over the last 150 years, and that is that, you know, you can have an entire catalog of all these beings. You can have all the different particulars that make up all the beings in the world, but it's difficult to put them all together and say, okay, now that I've put them all together, I know the picture, right? Because everything has been, in one sense, utterly analyzed down and taken apart till now we don't really know how to put it all back together again. Another kind of ontology, and it's the kind of ontology that gives birth to new forms of philosophizing, and that's what we might call fundamental ontology. Okay, and here I say how is being, because fundamental ontology then just simply asks questions about being itself, right? And this is not going to make a lot of sense right now, but we'll hopefully get to a point where it will. How does being be? How do we understand being as the absolutely necessary? And when I say that, what I mean is, even if you take a view that the universe is only material, and there's nothing else to it whatsoever, it's just atoms bumping around in the void, the best the best theoretical understanding at the moment is contained inside of the Big Bang Theory, right? I don't mean TV show, I mean the actual scientific theory. The Big Bang Theory, which says that the universe has not always been as it is, right? There was an event that gave birth to the universe, if you want to put it in flowery terms. Before that, there was no before. What does that mean? Before that, there was no before. Well, it not only gave birth to all the different arrangements in the universe, it gave the what happened at the Big Bang was the birth of time and of space. Or better, it would be better to say of time space. There's no time space before the Big Bang. And so now if you go to the before, so what's before the Big Bang? What is before the Big Bang? A singularity of being that seems to have contained all possible developments, right? This is really getting into, so fundamental ontology, however, now Big Bang itself, if you're careful here, is astrophysics, right? So what we're doing when we do astrophysics is we're studying the motion of stars and using the motion of stars to give us some kind of information that we can utilize to begin to piece together a vision of how the world or how the cosmos came into being, based on the fact that we have billions of years of star events around us that we can examine. And of course, that's almost an infinite task, but point is, we have the ability to give it a try. Now, 75 years ago, the assumption was that the universe is solid and fixed. So the Big Bang Theory was not agreed with because the metaphysical commitments of people 75, 80 years ago was that we don't live in a constantly expanding universe. They did believe that the universe might have come into being. They just didn't believe that it came into being in this particular kind of way, and that was actually based on the notion that there's a kind of perfection to the universe. I think this is a metaphysical commitment. There's a kind of perfection to the universe. Why would God play dice with the universe, et cetera, et cetera? And these kinds of thinkings sort of got in the way of the, in fact, it was these people who believed in the solid state theory of the universe, that it was, you know, it was sort of perfect and that's the way it is. It was these very people who came up with the name Big Bang Theory. They thought, right, it was throwing shade on the people who believed that we live in an expanding universe. Okay, but the point here is that we can use the regional sciences to advance our theoretical understanding, our speculation based on evidence in metaphysics, and we can move in the direction of putting together a picture that more closely resembles what we've learned from collecting the data and arranging the facts, right? So now we ask this thing: was there being before the universe? And there, yeah. So being doesn't require time space, but we are in a universe that is a time space universe, but it doesn't require time space. Being is the most fundamental. Being is what is, how is, where is. It's the isness of all things, and it is before existence. Essence precedes existence. This is a famous philosophical phrasing, right? Is it that essence precedes existence, or is it that existence must precede essence? Must essence precede existence, or must existence precede essence? That's a better way to put it. Well, of course, this is one of those things where you get whatever being may be, What we have is an existing universe that has essential traits that we can combine together to try to understand the reality that we live in and what is real, how things are real. But we have to sort of hold in attention essence and existence, because essence is sort of being itself and existence is more being for itself. Okay. Essence doesn't necessarily have an evolutionary goal. Existence has the goal of surviving, of continuing to exist. Okay. Well, this gets us into two of the stickiest areas that we want to try to evolve, try to involve, to evade when we're thinking about reality and being. And this is reductionism. Okay. Reductionism comes from the Latin word reducare, which means to lead back. All right. So if I have a lot of things going on around me and I can reduce away what's unnecessary to understand what's happening, and I just kind of keep reducing down until I get to that thing, which seems to be the source of what's happening, that in itself is a powerful analytical tool. Our ability to often hunt down the cause, at least some aspect of the material cause of an event, kind of puts us in the habit of looking to do the same thing, to reduce everything back to its initial cause. But if I say that the cause of the universe was the sudden expansion of the singularity, or the blow up of the singularity that happened before, that's kind of a really super commitment to material, to the material universe, to matters. In other words, I'm talking about everything is matter, and that matter originates before there's any time or space in the singularity. It's not arranged in the matter that we know now, but it won't be long, right? But once it actually happens, but who knows how long that singularity is, because there's no time, there's no space, right? So if we actually do something like that, lead ourselves back to the beginning of the universe, the most we can get back to is a couple of seconds after the Big Bang. And then before that, it all becomes speculation. It can be highly informed speculation, right? But if you really want to push it through and say, no, there was the material singularity, you just double down and said, you committed yourself to a reductionism, that everything has to be reduced back to matter, including what happened before there was even matter. Okay. So we want to be careful with reduction, because on the one hand, it's a powerful analytical tool that leads us from where we may be to kind of help us figure out, in a sense, to hold aside what's not necessary for understanding the moment, to focus in on what is necessary until maybe we find some essential aspect of the process or the thing that we have as being utterly necessary. We can say that there had to be being. There is being always. There had to be being before the Big Bang. There didn't have to be matter, and there didn't have to be ideas. There didn't have to be spirit. Well, all these things that we use that are all differentiated, those things are not absolutely necessary. Being is necessary, but having said that, again, we're back at the same issue of how do we comprehend being? How do we understand this concept? So in this sense, reductionism becomes a powerful intellectual error. Now, having just said that the only thing that must be is being itself, we also want to be careful then to not fall into the trap of generalization. Generalization, meaning the generic, affecting or involving all, opposed to specific, particular, or the idiomatic. Generalization is about the generic. Well, there's nothing more generic than saying being must be, and being is from singularity till now, right? That could end up being a really dangerous generalization, especially if I have a metaphysical commitment that says being is matter. That's how you get back to the point of, well, all matter existed already before the Big Bang in the singularity, right? Or if I say that all matter, all reality is ideas, okay? And then I trace it all the way back to the beginning. And then basically what I end up with then is that the singularity was an idea. It was all ideas. And then those ideas blew up and arranged a universe, right? Those are just two reductionisms I can create that actually are, in a sense, weaponized by generalization. And that is, the generalization it's generic, it affects all, it's universal. It comes from the Greek gene, and which is actually an Indo-European word, gene, that gives birth, to give birth or to beget, right? It's also a powerful analytical tool. We need generalization in order to accomplish inductive and deductive thinking. But generalizations can also, just like the generalization that sort of allows you to reduce everything down to matter and follow matter back to before you can even measure whether matter is there or not and still say, well, it had to be matter, or to reduce everything down to ideas and follow all the ideas back until you say, well, whatever was there before, it had to be an idea. These are competing metaphysical claims that are using generalization as a method to enforce the reductionism. So we want to be really careful not to do that. The other thing that a problem of generalizations is the way that we use generalization and reductionism in an everyday way. We reduce all people down to some trait, and then that trait in health, for all we know, most of the time, many of the people, especially when you're reducing people down to a group that has one particular trait, you can find that trait there because you're probably reducing them down to a human trait, and all human beings are capable of having all human traits. So, if you can see one trait in a people or in a culture or in a society that you don't like, and then reduce them down to that, then you can generalize about how they are, who they are, what they stand for. For instance, one example might be to generalize that you can generalize about race, generalize about sex, about gender, about attraction, right? You can generalize about a group. And all these generalizations then end up becoming stereotypes. Another thing is to actually be given very little evidence. Like, take for example, let's say there are 15 days of post George Floyd, Black Lives Matter protests in Minneapolis. There's more than that, but let's just say in the first 15 days. The first 15 days that happened, there were a few times that people ended up causing some kind of physical damage to a car or to a shop or something like that in those 15 days. In those 15 days, there were many more instances of people gathering peacefully and no property damage, no physical altercations. But a hasty generalization is made that everybody who is protesting is against property, is against the government, is against order, is against law. And if one person breaks a window, all 15,000 people are guilty of that. That's a hasty generalization. Hasty generalizations are informal logic fallacies. if you make a hasty generalization based on 1 or 2 bits of evidence and not a string of collected data and strictly arranged facts, you're committing a hasty generalization. That hasty generalization will more than likely over time turn into a stereotype, and that stereotype more than likely over time will find its way built into, wedded into, woven into the systems around us. Again, another reason why we need to ask ourselves, how do we view human nature? And then, what are our metaphysical commitments? Are we materialists? Are we idealists? Are we humanists? Are we atheists? Are we agnostics? Are we, you know, it can be any host of these things, all right? So this is just a general kind of overview of metaphysics, ontology, reality, these 2 issues, these 2 powers, the power to reduce and the power to generalize, as both beneficial, but used incorrectly, like any tool, they become weaponized and probably do more harm to you than they do to most of the people around you. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. And I'll talk to y'all later on. Thank you.